The first strike came without warning. One moment. The prospector's wake was cutting to the black with a steady hum, the old freighter's hull creaking under the strain of atmosphere entry, and the next it was shuddering under a wall of invisible force. The crew barely had time to register the alarm before the controls lit up like a dying sun. Storm cell, 3 clicks ahead, electromagnetic. The pilot barked over the intercom. The view beyond the forward glass was a churning wall of silver gray, clouds that moved too fast to be natural, their undersides glowing with a strange blue light. It wasn't on the charts. No weather patterns had been recorded for the moon. They were descending too. But this wasn't weather in any way that made sense. Inside, the crew braced as the storm swallowed them whole. The sky turned liquid. Static snarled through every channel. Hull plating groaned in agony as bolts of light raced along the metal like veins of quicksilver. The guidance system screamed its protest. Altitude warnings tripped one after another. The captain, Hale Rennick, was a man used to hard landings. 20 years in deep space had taught him that when a ship wanted to fall, all you could do was steer where it hurt the least. But as the wake lurched and twisted under the storm's grip, he realized this was no ordinary descent. It was as if something in that fog wanted them down. They hit the canopy first. The sound was a metallic roar, leaves and thick branches hammering the hull like clubs. The ship's underbelly scraped across something unyielding. Rock, maybe, before gravity took full control. When they finally skidded to a halt, the silence was so abrupt it rang in their ears. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The only sound was a pop and hiss of overheated systems. Rennick unstrapped, muscles aching from the impact harness. Status: drives cooked. Chief Engineer Mara Ivers said, without looking up from her console. Main comms are dead. Nav systems trying to reboot, but the storm wiped our calibration. Where the hell are we? Asked Arlen, the young xenobiologist, already peering out of the side viewport. The captain joined him. Outside, the jungle stretched in every direction, if you could call it jungle. The vegetation wasn't green, but a deep, oil-slick blue, its leaves long and drooping, glistening with beads of moisture. The ground was hidden under a blanket of pale mist that shifted in strange currents, as if it had a mind of its own. And somewhere out there, past the wreckage, something was moving. Not wind, not the natural sway of trees. This movement was slow, deliberate, watching. Rennick didn't mention it to the others. Not yet. They began the standard post-crash drill, inventory, damage check, survival assessment. Food rations, enough for maybe 10 days if stretched. Water reclamation, operational but fragile. Weapons, a single-pulse rifle, 3 flare guns, and a pair of multi-tools that could double as short-range shockers. It wasn't enough. By mid-afternoon, the air inside the wake was thick with humidity and the faint smell of something sweet and rotting. Arlen suggested stepping out to take environmental readings. Mara protested. The captain sided with Arlen. If they didn't learn the terrain, they'd be sitting ducks. They opened the forward hatch. The fog outside rolled in like a living thing, curling around their boots and legs, making the ground beneath seem further away than it was. Every sound was muted. Footsteps were dull thuds, and the drip of condensation from the hull sounded distant, almost swallowed before it reached the ear. Mara swept the area with her handheld scanner. Air's breathable. Heavy moisture content. Trace ammonia, not enough to harm us short-term. Short-term. Arlen raised an eyebrow. Long-term depends on what's making that fog. Mara replied. They moved no more than 30 meters from the ship when Rennick stopped. His ears were ringing, not from the crash, but from something else. A faint clicking, rhythmic, just on the edge of perception. It came from the mist ahead, then shifted to his right. Anyone else hear that? Arlen shook his head. Mara frowned. Hear what? The clicking stopped. They returned to the ship as the sky darkened unnaturally fast. Night seemed to fall in layers, the light dimming not from a setting sun, but from the fog thickening until the world was no more than shapes and shadows. That night, Rennick couldn't sleep. He sat in the dim glow of the emergency lantern, going over the events in his head. The storm, the pull toward the surface, the feeling that they'd been placed here. A noise from outside made him look up. Something brushed against the hull. It was a slow, Scraping sound, metal against metal, like claws tracing the outline of a ship. He froze, holding his breath. The sound moved along the starboard side, paused, then tapped once, sharp, deliberate, before fading into the fog. By morning, they found it. 4 parallel gouges etched into the hull's outer plating. The marks were deep, the metal warped to the edges. Something had been testing the ship's skin. Rennick didn't tell the crew everything he'd heard, but the gouges were enough. They decided on rotating watches. Arlen volunteered for the first night shift. It would be the last shift he ever took. The next evening, fog rolled in so thick it pressed against the hull windows like a living wall. Visibility dropped to nothing. Even the emergency beacons looked like pale ghosts in the mist. Arlen stood outside, just past a hatch, scanning with his handheld, muttering about anomalous readings. Then Rennick heard it again, the clicking, this time faster, closer. "Arlen," he called through the comm, "get inside." No response. The fog moved in a way that made no sense, curling upward around Arlen's legs. A shape emerged, tall, jointed, wrong in all the ways that made Rennick's gut twist. He barely had time to shout before it struck. There was no roar, no scream. Just a blur, a flash of 2 pale limbs, and Arlen was gone. The fog folded over the spot where Arlen had been, swallowing him whole. The silence that followed was unnatural, thick, pressing in from all sides, as if the air itself was listening. Somewhere in that endless white, something moved again, but slower this time, patient. Rennick closed the hatch. The fog pressed against the hull for the rest of the night, as though it had weight. No wind, no rustle of foliage, not even a faint settling of the ship's stress frame, just a kind of stillness that made every small sound seem too loud. Rennick kept the rest of the crew inside, rotating them through uneasy watches. Mara Ivor stayed awake at the engineering station, staring at power readouts and muttering about energy spikes in the fog that didn't match anything natural. The others dozed in short bursts, jerking awake at imagined sounds. By dawn, the fog thinned only slightly, revealing the crushed vegetation around the crash site. The place where Arlen had been standing was undisturbed. No footprints, no blood. It was as if he had been plucked out of the world without leaving a trace. They didn't talk much during the morning meal. No one asked where Arlen might be. They all knew the odds of him wandering back through the mist alive. Mara broke the silence first. "I've got power enough to run partial comms for a minute or two if we cut life support to minimum. Question is, do we want to broadcast? Or do we keep quiet and hope we're not lighting a beacon for whatever's out there?" The captain considered it. Rennick had seen too many desperate distress calls end in worse trouble than before. Not every answering signal meant rescue. But the wake wasn't going anywhere without serious repairs, and staying here meant depending on luck that had already failed them once. Send the ping, he decided. Short range. Keep it clean and narrow. Mara's fingers danced over the controls. A low hum filled the cabin as the battered comm array fought to life. She sent a distress signal in 3 pulses, a standard emergency hail. The only reply was static. Then, faintly, through the white noise, click, 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 click. It was slow, deliberate, and carried the same pattern Rennick had heard before Arlen vanished. Mara froze, her hand hovering over the shutdown. That wasn't. "Kill it," Rennick said. She powered down the comms. The hum dying like a hell breath finally released. They spent the rest of the morning strengthening the perimeter. It wasn't much. A ring of proximity beacons salvaged from navigation gear, each set to flash if something large moved through their field. The fog distorted light at a distance, so the beacons were the only way to have warning before something was on top of them. The work was slow. Visibility was poor, and every step away from the wake felt like walking into the throat of something unseen. Rennick insisted they work in pairs, one setting a beacon, the other watching the fog for movement. By the 3rd beacon, it happened. Mara saw it first. A shift in the mist, a pale limb bending in ways no joint should bend. It slid between tree-like trunks, moving without a sound. The proximity beacon remained dark. Whatever it was too low profile to trigger the sensors. "Mara," Rennick murmured. "I see it," she whispered back. The thing stopped, half shrouded in the vapor. There was no clear outline, only the impression of something tall, thin, its skin reflecting the weak light in dull patches like wet stone. A head tilted toward them. Then came the clicking. Slow, measured, almost curious. The creature withdrew into the fog without another sound. The beacons remained dark. Back at the ship, they argued. Lauren, the youngest of the crew after Arlen, wanted a break for the ridge they'd spotted on descent, hoping for better vantage and possibly clear air. Mara shot that down. The ridge was hours away on foot, and they had no idea how many of those things were out there. Rennick listened but kept his eyes on the viewport. The fog beyond shifted in slow coils, though there was no wind to move it. His gut told him that what they had seen was only one of many. By nightfall, they had a rough perimeter in place, but the air was thicker than ever. The emergency lights outside were barely visible smudges in the haze. The first attack came in the deep hours, when human reflexes were dulled and thoughts moved slower. Lauren was on watch, standing near the hatch with the pulse rifle slung loose in his grip. The others slept, or pretended to, their bodies rigid in makeshift bunks. Something tapped the hull again. Slow, almost testing. Lauren stiffened, swung the rifle toward the sound. The tapping stopped. Then the clicking began. Not distant this time. It was right outside, only a thin wall of hull separating it from him. He raised the rifle, tried to line the sights with where he thought the sound came from. His breath fogged the visor glass. A shape passed across the narrow viewport. It didn't pause, didn't hurry, just slid by like a shadow moving underwater. The perimeter beacon flashed once, then another, and then they went out one by one, as if something was moving around the ship and disabling them in sequence. Lauren backed toward the sleeping area, calling Rennick's name. Before the captain could reach him, the hatch alarm screamed, an override from the outside. The inner seal held, but only because the damage from the crash had warped the frame, locking it into place. A thin crack split in the hatch where two panels didn't meet flush, and through it poured the fog, rolling across the deck like a low tide. Something moved in it, low to the ground at first, then rising, unfolding in jerks and angles that spoke of anatomy not meant for this gravity. The crew scattered, grabbing whatever could serve as a weapon. Mara swung a shocker, its blue arc sizzling in the damp air. A pale limb shot through the fog toward Lauren, wrapping around his arm with impossible strength. The rifle clattered to the floor. Lauren's scream was short, cut off as the thing yanked him forward, his boots skidding on the deck before he disappeared into the fog and through the hatch's narrow gap. The sound of his struggle faded quickly into the mist when they managed to force the hatch closed again, sealing the crack with a fusion patch from Mara's kit. They stood in silence, chest heaving, each of them staring at the fog still lingering on the floor. Two gone in as many nights. The wake was starting to feel less like shelter and more like a cage. The night after Lauren's disappearance brought no rest. Sleep had become a luxury the crew could no longer afford. Every creak of the hull, every faint hiss of the fog against metal, was a trigger. The prospector's wake felt smaller by the hour, its walls closing in under the pressure of a wilderness they couldn't see, couldn't understand. Rennick moved between the cramped compartments, checking on the others. Mara sat at the engineering console, shoulders tense, one hand curled around a mug of cold coffee she'd stopped drinking hours ago. She was running a sweep of the perimeter beacons they'd managed to get back online after the attack. "They're working," she said without looking at him. "But the readings are strange. Half the time the sensors are picking up movement where there's nothing, and the other half—" "They're blind," Rennick finished. Mara nodded grimly. By mid-morning, the fog lightened enough to see faint shapes of the surrounding jungle. The alien flora loomed like frozen giants, their trunks broad and uneven, bark shimmering faintly as if wet. The leaves, if they could be called that, were elongated plates that swayed almost imperceptibly despite the absence of wind. Two of the remaining crew, Harlan and Sorrel, ventured out with Rennick to replace a damaged beacon. They kept within sight of the wake, the bulk of its crash-scarred hull a gray shadow in the mist. The jungle floor was uneven, slick underfoot. Thin vines trailed from the branches above, swaying like pendulums. The sound of their boots on the spongy ground was swallowed almost instantly by the heavy air. Halfway to the damaged beacon, they heard it. Click, 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 click. It came from ahead, low and deliberate. The sound carried an odd weight, like a pressure on the ears rather than something truly audible. Harlan froze. That's it. That's the sound you've been talking about. Sorrel turned slowly, scanning the mist. Rennick raised his hand for silence. The clicking stopped. A shape slid between two tree trunks, tall, thin, impossibly still. It stayed just at the edge of perception, a suggestion rather than a clear form, the fog clinging to it like it didn't want to let go. The thing turned its head. Two faint points of green light flared briefly where its eyes should be. The beacons didn't trigger. The crew backed away, step by step, until the wake was once again at their backs. The shape melted into the mist without pursuit. Inside, Mara studied the sensor logs. The beacon didn't trip because it wasn't walking, she explained, tapping the display. It was too still. It was gliding. No vibration in the ground to register. That's why they get so close, Rennick said. They don't move like us. Sorrel, pacing by the viewport, shook her head. No, they move like they know we're watching. Like they want us to see just enough to keep us scared. The remark hung in the air. No one wanted to admit how true it felt. That night, they tried a new system. Harlan took first watch with Mara, while Sorrel and Rennick attempted to rest. Every 20 minutes, the watchers would sweep the perimeter with the wake's external floodlights, cutting through the fog in slow arcs. For the first hour, it was uneventful. Then, during the third sweep, Mara caught sight of something in the beam. At first, it looked like a branch, hanging at an odd angle. But then it bent backwards, unnaturally, and another limb joined it in the wrong place. The thing stood just outside the beam's reach, head cocked, the faint glint of its eyes visible. The floodlight's beam shifted, and the creature was gone. Harlan swore softly. Did you see it blink out? No, Mara said. It didn't move fast. It just wasn't there anymore. By the next morning, all of them had seen the figures at least once. Never up close, never long enough to make out details, only shapes that lingered just far enough away to remain unknowable. Sorrel began sketching them in a battered notebook. Try to capture the strange geometry of their limbs. They're studying us, she muttered one afternoon as she worked. Everything about the way they approach is calculated. Rennick didn't answer. He was starting to think she was right. It was on the fourth day after Lauren's death that the predators grew bolder. The fog thickened abruptly in the late afternoon, turning the wake's external lights into pale, useless halos. The beacons flickered erratically, some triggering, others staying dead even as movement swam in the mist. From the viewport, Harlan spotted three shapes. They weren't keeping their usual distance now. They were circling, slow and methodical, the clicking sound drifting from different directions in overlapping patterns. They're testing perimeter, Mara said under her breath. The crew armed themselves. Rennick kept the pulse rifle. Mara gripped her shocker tight enough that her knuckles whitened. Hours passed of the predators never fully approaching, only orbiting in the mist. The clicking grew fainter, then stopped entirely. When morning came, they found two of the beacons smashed, their casing split open with surgical precision. The wires were gone. They're dismantling our defenses, Sorrel said. And they know exactly where to hit us next, Rennick added. The wake's atmosphere was thick with unspoken fear. Even when the creatures weren't visible, the crew felt them, a constant pressure at the edge of awareness. That night, Rennick took watch himself. The fog was heavy, curling against the viewport in slow eddies. Hours passed in silence. Then he saw it. One of the creatures stepped fully into the beam of the floodlight. It was taller than he expected, its body narrow and elongated, the skin a mottled pale gray that almost mirrored the fog. The limbs were long and jointed oddly, the knees bending backward, the arms ending in too many fingers. Its head was oval, eyeless at first glance, until two slits flared open, revealing the same faint green glow he'd seen before. The thing stood there for a heartbeat too long, then melted backward into mist, the glow fading last. Rennick didn't call for the others. There was nothing to do, nothing they could do yet. By the next morning, one truth had settled over the crew like a weight. The predators could get to them any time they wanted. They weren't attacking outright, because they didn't need to. They were patient. They were hunting on their own schedule. The fourth week on Carroll Reach began with silence. Not the natural kind, but the deliberate absence of sound. The way a forest goes still when something dangerous is near. Rennick noticed it first. He'd been pacing the prospector's wake's command deck, reviewing the night's sensor logs, when it hit him. No creak of the hull. No distant hiss of moisture dripping from the alien canopy. Not even the faint hum from the fog, outside brushing against the ship's hull plating. It was as though the entire planet had stopped breathing. Mara joined him at the viewport, rubbing her arms. Feels wrong. Like the air's heavier today. It is, Rennick said. Or maybe we're just feeling it now. By midday, the oppressive quiet had the crew jumpy. Harlan tried playing music on one of the wake's old shipboard systems, but the sound felt like it didn't belong, like it was intruding into a space that wasn't theirs anymore. He shut it off within minutes. The beacons were still failing in patterns they couldn't explain. Sorrel mapped the outages and found they form an irregular curve around the crash site. They're not breaking them at random, she muttered. They're shaping something. Mara leaned over her shoulder, frowning. Shaping what? I don't know, but it's deliberate. That night, the clicking returned, louder, faster. It no longer came from a single direction. Instead, it bounced from point to point in the fog, weaving a net of sound around the wake. Rennick stood at the viewport, trying to follow the rhythm. They're coordinating, he said under his breath. Mara came up beside him, like they're corralling us. He nodded, or drawing us out. The sound stopped. Then, in the stillness, came a single, deep thunk against the hull. Not a knock, heavier, deliberate, like something had struck the metal with the flat of its hand. By morning, the crew knew the creatures were no longer just testing them. They were setting a stage. The decision to investigate was reckless, but it didn't feel like a choice. Sorrel argued that understanding the sound pattern might give them an advantage. Harlan wanted to stay inside, but the others outvoted him. Rennick, Mara, and Sorrel geared up and moved out into the fog, following the direction of the previous night's clicks. The jungle swallowed them quickly. Here, the air seemed thicker, the mist tinged with faint green threads of light drifting lazily in the dark. The ground was softer, almost pulsing faintly beneath their boots, like there was something living just beneath the surface. They found the first source of sound an hour later, not a creature, but a structure. It looked like a tangle of roots woven into a lattice, the spaces between them strung within, glistening strands that vibrated gently in the still air. When Rennick touched one, it produced a faint, rapid clicking. The pitch shifted depending on how much tension he applied. They're not just hunting, Mara whispered. They're broadcasting. Following the sound webs, they found more, each one larger, more complex, stretching between massive alien trunks like spiderwork. The clicks came not from any one source, but from the strands themselves as they quivered in the damp. Sorrel crouched to examine one more closely. It's like a trap. The sound isn't for us. It's for them. A signal network. If anything brushes against these strands, every one of them knows exactly where it happened, Rennick finished. They cut through one of the webs, and the effect was immediate. The clicking pattern in the fog changed, a ripple of sharp, staccato bursts moving outward from their position like an alarm. Move. Rennick barked. The first shadow appeared to their left, gliding between the trunks with inhuman grace. Then another behind them. The creatures didn't rush. They closed and slowly, the sound webs thrumming around them as if feeding the hunt. The crew pushed hard for the wake, but the path they'd taken in seemed to shift. Every turn looked the same. The fog deepened. The clicking surrounded them completely now, overlapping into a sound that was almost language. Harlan's voice crackled over comms. I've got movement all around you. You need to. His voice cut to static. Something moved past Rennick's peripheral vision, impossibly tall, its limbs brushing both ground and overhead branches at once. Sorrel stumbled, her boot catching in a root. Rennick and Mara turned back, just in time to see one of the creatures step from the mist directly behind her. Its hand unfolded into long, needle-thin appendages. It touched her shoulder lightly, almost gently, and she went rigid. Her eyes met Rennick's for a split second, wide with terror, before she was pulled backward into the fog without a sound. They ran. The wake's bulk finally loomed through the haze, the sound webs thinning. Harlan was waiting at the hatch, pulse pistol raised, face pale. "Where's Sorrel?" Rennick didn't answer. Mara pushed past him, slamming the hatch shut the second Rennick cleared it. The clicking faded slowly over the next hour, but it never stopped completely. It stayed out there, a constant reminder that the creatures were still listening. That night, Mara stared at the map of the damaged beacons. The curve Sorrel had marked earlier now made terrible sense. It was a funnel, a shape designed to herd them into the densest web of sound traps. "They wanted us there," she said. "They're not random hunters. They're using the environment like a weapon." Rennick leaned over the console, jaw tight, "Which means they'll keep tightening the net until we either starve or step outside again." Neither of them said what they were both thinking. Next time, they wouldn't just take one of them. The fog had always been there, patient and endless, but in the days following Sorrel's disappearance, it began to change. At first it was subtle, a faint shimmer that clung longer to the viewport glass, a pale iridescence where there had been only dull white before. Then came the smell. Not sharp, not rotting, but sweet, almost metallic, like overripe fruit left too long in a sealed jar. Mara noticed it before anyone else. She'd been recalibrating the wake's oxygen scrubbers when she detected a chemical reading she didn't recognize. Trace organics, airborne. Something not in the planet's baseline atmosphere. She ran the numbers twice before going to Rennick. "It's not just in the jungle anymore," she told him. "It's here, in our air." By nightfall, 2 crew members, Harlan and Dale, were coughing. Not the dry, irritated cough from stale recycled air, but deep, wet, hitching coughs that left their faces pale and eyes glassy. When Rennick checked their oxygen readings, the numbers were fine. Too fine. CO2 normal. O2 normal. And yet they're suffocating, Mara muttered, scrolling through the environmental logs. Something's binding to the oxygen molecules themselves. Their bodies can't use it. Rennick's mind flashed to the creatures in the fog. Tall, silent, patient. They don't need to rush in if the air kills us for them. The next morning brought a thicker fog. It pressed against the wake's hull like a living thing, moving with a slow, deliberate pulse. When Rennick opened the outer airlock to take a sample, the mist seemed to lean inside, curling upward along the doorframe before sinking back. The sample canister hissed as it filled, and the air inside was faintly warm, as though it had been exhaled. Mara examined it under the lab's crude analysis gear. "Not mist," she whispered. "Aerosolized something. Protein chains. Like spores, but they're engineered, not random. These are meant to get into lungs." Her voice caught. "They're not just hunters. They're terraformers." That night, Rennick had the first dream. He was standing in the jungle, unable to see the ship. The fog moved like liquid, curling around his legs, climbing his chest. The clicking sound was gone. In its place was slow, rhythmic breathing. Long inhales, longer exhales. The air pressed into him with each breath, sinking into his lungs like weight. He tried to cough it out, but couldn't. Something massive moved in the mist ahead of him. He couldn't see its face, only a silhouette and the faint glow of something green in his chest. It bent down impossibly low until he could feel the warmth of its breath against his cheek. Then he woke, gasping, the taste of metal thick on his tongue. By the third day, Dale was dead. His body was limp and pale, eyes sunken, skin cool, but his mouth was frozen open as if he'd been taking one last desperate breath. Mara ran another sweep of the ship's filtration system. The spores were inside every duct. She could burn them out, but only temporarily. "They'll just keep making more," she said, exhaustion in her voice. "If they control the atmosphere, they control us." Rennick knew she was right. Staying sealed inside was no longer a defense. The wake wasn't a fortress. It was a lung they could fill at will. The breakthrough came by accident. While dismantling one of the damaged exterior beacons for spare parts, Mara noticed a faint residue clinging to the inside of its casing, a gray film that seemed to fluoresce under certain wavelengths. She scraped some into a vial, then tested it in the lab. The protein structure matched the spores, but they were dead, chemically neutralized. What killed them? Rennick asked. Mara pointed to the scorched interior of the beacon. Heat and radiation. Enough exposure scrambles their chains. We could theoretically burn the air clean. Rennick frowned. "We don't have enough power to heat the entire ship." "No," Mara said. "But We can weaponize it outside. The plan was crude but simple. Rig a portable emitter from the ship's auxiliary engine coils, carry it into the densest fog, and superheat the air until the spores broke down. They set out at dusk, Rennick, Mara, and Harlan, moving slowly through the mist of the emitter slung between them. The clicking had returned in the distance, but fainter now, almost curious. Half an hour in, the fog began to thicken unnaturally, coiling in ways that defied the wind. The breathing sound returned, deep and steady. "They know we're here," Harlan whispered. "They've always known," Rennick replied. The first shapes appeared at the edge of their vision, not moving toward them, but pacing alongside. The emitter's hum seemed to agitate the fog, making it swirl faster. When they activated it, the air shimmered with heat. The sweet, metallic smell turned sharp and acrid, and the fog recoiled slightly, thinning in patches. Then the creatures advanced. One moved close enough that Rennick could see the faint ridges along its elongated arms, the way its chest expanded and contracted slowly, inhaling the air they were trying to burn. It reached toward the emitter, and for the first time, Rennick heard it make a sound other than clicking or breathing. A low, resonant hum, like a warning. Mara twisted the output higher. The hum became a sharp, almost human scream. The creature stepped back, not from pain, Rennick realized, but from sudden awareness. They'd found something that could hurt them. They retreated to the wake, the emitter still humming in the cargo bay like a caged animal. The fog outside seemed thinner for hours afterward, but by dawn it was as thick as before. Mara sat on the deck, staring at the emitter. "We can hurt them, but not enough. Not yet." Rennick looked at the viewport, where the faint shapes of the creatures stood in the mist, unmoving, just watching. He knew it was only a matter of time before they adapted, before they found a way to breathe through fire. The wake was never quiet anymore. Even when the crew tried to sleep, the air carried faint sounds, not mechanical hums or groaning hull plates, but a rhythm, a slow, patient inhale and exhale, so subtle you could almost convince yourself it was imagination. Almost. 3 nights after the emitter test, Rennick woke to find Mara already in the control room, staring at the forward viewport. The fog was thick, but she wasn't looking at the mist. She was looking through it. "They're closer," she said without turning. "Not moving. Just there." Rennick leaned forward and saw what she meant. Shapes, not the shifting outlines they glimpsed before, but clearer now. Tall, angular forms that seemed to lean forward slightly, as if pressing their attention against the ship. One stood directly in the center of his view, motionless. The glow in its chest was no longer faint. It pulsed, slow, steady, a deep emerald light that seemed to throb in time with the breathing. Rennick's hands tightened on the console. "That's the same thing I saw in the dream." Mara finally turned to him, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "It's not just a dream. Harlan saw it last night, too. Said it was staring at him through the fog." By morning, the glow had faded from sight, swallowed by the mist. But Rennick couldn't stop thinking about it. The way the creature's breathing seemed tied to the pulsing light, as if that organ was its true center. The breakthrough came from the emitter logs. Mara had been analyzing the heat dispersal patterns from their fog-clearing attempt. Most of the thermal output had dissipated evenly, except in one section, where the heat seemed to bend, refracting as if passing through a lens. "That was the night one of them got close," Mara explained, pointing to the spike. "The lensing effect lines up with where its chest would have been. Whatever's inside them doesn't just glow. It interacts with energy." Rennick frowned. "Absorbs it. Or channels it," she said. "Like a heart, but for power instead of blood." They needed a closer look, which meant going out again. Harlan was still weak from the spore sickness, so it was just Rennick and Mara this time. The emitter had been modified, not to repel the creatures, but to mark the glow, tuning to the same energy frequency, so it could track the signature through the fog. The trek was slow, every step deliberate. The mist shifted in unnatural ways, curling toward them like lazy predators. The breathing was louder here, accompanied by faint clicking, not random, but spaced, almost like language. Half an hour in, the emitter pinged. "Got one," Mara said. Through the haze, the shape materialized, massive, over 3 meters tall, its arms longer than its legs, body bent forward as though gravity pulled differently for it. The chest pulsed bright, the same deep emerald Rennick remembered. The creature stood perfectly still, but the fog around it coiled upward, forming strange, almost symmetrical patterns in the air. Rennick forced himself to step closer. The air was warmer here, tinged with that metallic sweetness. The organ was mesmerizing, not just a simple glow, but a shifting matrix of light, patterns moving across it like veins of living crystal. It seemed to sense their attention, the pulses quickening slightly. Mara raised the scanner. But the instant the beam touched the creature's chest, the glow flared so bright it burned after images into Rennick's eyes. The fog around them surged forward, wrapping tight. The creature didn't attack. Instead, it lowered its head, exhaling in a long, deliberate hiss. Rennick felt the warmth wash over his face. And in that moment, a flood of images filled his mind. Not thoughts, not words, just scenes. A vast green ocean under a black sky, towers of bone rising from the waves, the fog pouring from cracks in the earth like smoke from a dying fire. And at the center, a sphere of the same green light, immense, alive, beating like a planetary heart. Then it was gone. The glow dimmed, the breathing slowed, and the creature stepped backward into the mist. They made it back to the wake in silence. Mara was pale, her hands trembling as she removed the scanner's core. It didn't just glow brighter, she said finally. It reacted. It communicated. Rennick nodded slowly. I saw something. A place. An ocean. Towers. The same light, but bigger. Mara's voice was low, almost a whisper. That's not an organ. It's a fragment. A shard of something else. Something bigger. Maybe the source of the fog. That night, Rennick dreamed again. He was underwater, but breathing easily. The green light was everywhere, turning the water into liquid emerald. He drifted toward a colossal shape, not a creature, but a structure alive and yet unmoving. From its surface rose tendrils of mist, curling upward until they broke the water and spread into the air above. And then he saw the truth. The light wasn't making the fog. It was exhaling it. The entire planet was one slow, patient breath, and the creatures were its messengers. When Rennick woke, his throat was dry and his chest ached, as though he'd been holding his breath for hours. The crew was unraveling. Harlan was coughing again. The spores were thicker in the air ducts, and the shapes in the fog no longer kept their distance. Sometimes they stood right at the edge of the hull lights, staring in. Mara locked the lab and began working on something she wouldn't explain, saying only, if that green light is a core, we don't need to fight the fog. We just need to kill the heart. Rennick wasn't sure if she meant one creature, or the thing that breathed beneath the planet's surface. By the end of the week, the emitter was ready. It no longer projected heat. Instead, it built a resonance, tuned not to burn but to disrupt. The first test would be in the jungle, near where they'd seen the glowing chest most often. Rennick had a bad feeling they wouldn't be the only ones hunting that night. The emitter's new resonance wasn't meant to burn or scatter. It was designed to pull, to draw the glow toward them, to make the green heart show itself. It worked faster than Rennick expected. The first night they took it into the jungle, the fog reacted almost instantly, thickening and fast, rolling waves. The air temperature dropped sharply, and every sound, every insect call, every rustle died away. Mara adjusted the emitter's frequency, her gloved hand steady despite the oppressive silence. It's listening, she murmured. From somewhere deep in the mist came a low, resonant tone, not a growl, but something deeper, longer. It vibrated through Rennick's ribs, and for a moment, he thought the ground itself shifted beneath his boots. They followed the signal through the undergrowth until the trees began to change. Their trunks widened, their roots split and curled upward in unnatural spirals, forming archways that looked almost carved. Moss here wasn't green. It glowed faintly blue, casting ghost light over the fog. The forest floor sloped downward, and before long, they were moving into a ravine where the air was warmer, wetter. The breathing sound was constant now, not faint but heavy, as though they were standing right beside the source. Rennick checked his scanner. The green signature was strongest directly ahead and below. Mara's voice was quiet. There's an opening. At the ravine's base, they found it, a fissure in the rock wide enough for a person to squeeze through, the edges worn smooth by centuries of moisture. The fog didn't spill into it. Instead, it poured out in a slow, steady stream, like smoke from a vent. The descent was steep and treacherous. The walls sweated condensation, the rocks slick under their gloves. The only sound was the drip of water, and the breathing, louder now, accompanied by faint, irregular clicking, the same alien cadence they'd heard from the creatures above. After what felt like hours, the tunnel widened, and they stepped out onto a ledge overlooking a massive underground cavern. The first thing Rennick saw was the light. Not one globe, but hundreds, no, thousands, of green orbs pulsing the darkness, embedded in the walls, the floor, even the ceiling. Some were small, no bigger than a fist. Others were massive, the size of escape pods. All of them pulsed in perfect unison, beating like the synchronized hearts of some vast, unseen organism. At the cavern center was the largest of them all, a sphere nearly 10 meters across, suspended above the ground by thick, root-like tendrils that plunged into the rock below. From its surface, mist drifted upward in slow spirals. It was alive. Mara's breath hitched. That's it. That's the source. Rennick's mind went back to the visions the creature had pushed into his head. The ocean, the towers of bone, the light at the center. But here, in the cavern, it was different. It wasn't an ocean they stood beside. It was a lung. The pulses of green were not random. Each beat came with the faintest exhale of mist, filling the cavern, rising to the fissure above, spreading through the jungle across the planet. And the tendrils, they weren't roots. They were veins. Something moved at the far edge of the cavern. Shapes stepped out from behind the glowing spheres, tall, angular silhouettes, their chests glowing just like the fragments above ground. The creatures stood in perfect stillness, their heads tilted slightly, their eyes fixed on the two intruders. One stepped forward. Its glow was stronger than the others, the light inside it swirling faster as if stirred. It lowered its head, inhaled deeply, and the green heart in the center of the cavern pulsed brighter in response. Mara's grip tightened on the emitter. They're linked. The lead creature began to walk toward them, each step slow, deliberate. Rennick felt the ground vibrate beneath its weight. Mara, he said, whatever you're planning, now's the time. She adjusted the emitter's controls, her face lit by its flickering readout. If I can get the frequency high enough, it should destabilize the resonance between them and the core. That'll either drive them away or make them all come for us, Rennick finished. Exactly. The creature was almost at the base of the ledge when she activated the emitter. The cavern erupted with sound, a low, bone-shaking hum that made Rennick's teeth ache. The green spheres flickered, their synchronized pulses faltering. The fog poured from the central heart faster, thicker, as though the organism was straining to maintain control. The lead creature froze, its head snapping upward, mouth open in a silent snarl. The others behind began to sway, their glows dimming and flaring erratically. The hum grew louder. The cavern itself seemed to shudder. Pieces of rock fell from the ceiling, splashing into pools below. And then Rennick saw it. Cracks forming along the surface of the central heart, light spilling out in blinding flashes. The lead creature lunged. It moved with impossible speed, scrambling up the rock toward them. Rennick fired his sidearm, the round sparking harmlessly against its chest. It didn't slow. Mara shoved the emitter into his hands. Hold it steady. She pulled a cylindrical device from her pack, a shaped charge, and slammed it into the rock beside the fissure they'd entered through. Rennick's stomach dropped. You're going to seal us in? He shouted. Seal them in, she snapped. If this thing bursts, the fog's going to flood every corner of the planet. We can't let it out. The creature reached the ledge just as Mara armed the charge. Rennick swung the emitter directly at its chest. The hum peaked in a piercing, glass-shattering whine. The creature staggered, its glow sputtering. And in that heartbeat, Mara hit the detonator. The blast tore through the fissure entrance, collapsing tons of rock into the opening. Dust and smoke filled the ledge, choking the air. Below, the central heart convulsed, its surface splitting wider. Light and fog surged upward in a violent torrent, smashing against the sealed rock above. The creatures howled, the first true sound Rennick had heard from them, and the cavern's temperature plummeted. They were trapped now, The only way out lay deeper into the cavern, and as the cracks in the heart widened, Rennick realized they had only minutes before it either collapsed or something inside it emerged. The cavern roared. Not with wind, not with the sound of rockfall, but with breath. It was everywhere, pressing against Rennick's ears and chest, a constant tide of inhalation and exhalation that seemed to come from the very stone. The central heart writhed in its cradle of veins, each pulse now jagged and desperate, the green glow stuttering like a failing star. Steam hissed from its cracks, carrying with it the scent of something metallic and sharp, like blood mixed with ozone. Mara crouched beside the shattered ledge, coughing into her sleeve. The collapsed fissure behind them was already slicked with condensation from the fog pounding against it. "It's building pressure," she rasped. The whole cavern could blow. Rennick's gaze never left the heart. The fissures had deepened into fractures, and through them he caught glimpses of something moving inside, not light, not liquid, but shapes. Slow, coiling motions, like limbs pressed against a membrane. "We need to finish it," he said, "before whatever's inside decides it's ready to walk." From the far edges of the cavern, the remaining creatures shifted. Their movements had lost the eerie synchronicity they'd displayed before. Now they twitched, staggered, their glowing chests pulsing out of rhythm with the heart. One collapsed entirely, its body folding in on itself like wet paper before disintegrating into a cloud of fine mist that drifted upward toward the core. Mara swallowed, her voice tightening. "They're feeding it." The realization came with a sinking weight. The creatures weren't separate from the heart. They were extensions of it. The fog was the breath. The tendrils were veins. And the creatures were cells. A sharp crack split the air. The surface of the heart peeled back in a single, jagged strip, releasing a column of blinding green light that lit every corner of the cavern. Rennick shielded his eyes, but in that instant he saw it. The thing inside was enormous, but not in the way of brute size. It was vast in shape, its outlines seeming to bend space around it. Its limbs, or what might have been limbs, were long and fluid, folding and unfolding in patterns that made no anatomical sense. And its face, if it had one, was a void within the glow, a place where light simply vanished. It wasn't emerging. It was waking up. Mara gripped his arm. "If we destroy the heart now, we might kill it. But if we miscalculate, it'll survive, and it'll remember us." Her hand hovered over the emitter's controls, then moved to the second-shaped charge in her pack. "We place this directly under it. Set the yield to maximum. The blast should collapse the entire cavern. And take us with it," Rennick said. She gave a short, humorless smile. "You have a better plan?" He didn't. They moved fast, skirting the cavern's edge to avoid the staggering creatures. The glow was almost painful now, the air thick and warm like the inside of a lung. Each pulse of the heart shook the rock under their boots. As they drew closer, the tendrils around the core shifted, curling tighter, as though sensing their approach. One snapped forward suddenly, striking the ground where Rennick had been standing a second earlier, leaving a smoldering scar in the rock. They sprinted the last few meters. Mara dropped to her knees and began arming the charge, her fingers moving with brutal efficiency. Rennick covered her, his rifle barking at any tendril that moved within range, though the bullets did little more than irritate them. 30 seconds, she shouted. A sound rose from the heart, not the steady breathing they'd heard before, but something higher, sharper. It was almost a scream, though too vast to be made by a mouth. The creatures reacted instantly, lurching toward them in jerky, unnatural motions. Rennick emptied the last of his ammo, then grabbed the emitter from his pack. He didn't adjust the frequency this time. He cranked it beyond safe limits. The hum it released was unbearable, a grinding, metallic shriek that sent vibrations through his bones. The nearest creatures convulsed, their glows flaring once before winking out entirely. The tendrils recoiled, thrashing wildly. Mara slammed the final seal on the charge. "Go!" They ran. The heart's glow swelled behind them, filling their shadows with jagged light. The cavern walls seemed to close in as they sprinted along the ledge toward a narrow tunnel Rennick had spotted earlier, an uncharted path leading deeper underground. The countdown in his head hit 0. The explosion was a sun blooming in the dark. The shockwave hurled them forward, tearing stone from the walls and ceiling. Rennick hit the ground hard. The breath punched from his lungs, ears ringing. When he looked back, there was no heart, only a collapsing mass of rock and shattered veins, the green glow fading beneath the rubble. They didn't stop running until the tunnel spat them out into open night. The jungle was silent, the fog gone. The air was cold and clear, the stars sharp overhead. It felt wrong without the constant hiss of breath beneath it all. Mara leaned against a tree, her hands shaking. "Do you think it's dead?" Rennick stared at the horizon, where the mountains loomed black against the starlight. "I think it's buried." She caught the unspoken part. For now, they began the long walk back to the outpost, neither speaking. The quiet was almost worse than the noise had been. Halfway there, Rennick glanced at a scanner. No green pulses, no movement. But as they reached a ridge above the outpost, the device flickered once, a faint blip miles below the surface, far beyond the cavern they destroyed. It pulsed. Once. Then again. Rennick switched it off. Some things, he thought, are better left sleeping.